The most important part of an essay is the body paragraph. So in this presentation, I'd like to take you through how to build a paragraph in general, and then how to build the paragraphs for the first essay, the exemplification essay. In this presentation, and in the other presentations that will follow, I will be using this as the paragraph model. I recommend that you think of a paragraph in a kind of geometrical shape with different parts. So that's what I'm going to use to illustrate the parts of the body paragraph. The first part of the paragraph is the topic sentence. The topic sentence contains the subject and the main or controlling idea of the paragraph. It helps you, the reader, know what information needs to be included in the details of the paragraph, and it also helps the reader to understand what's coming, so the reader can better assess the information that he or she will be reading in your paragraph. The majority of the paragraph will be the support, that information that helps to explain or justify the claim or idea that's stated in the topic sentence. As with all of the paragraphs in this particular class, the topic sentence for your essays should be the first sentence of the body paragraph, and everything that follows should be clear and detailed explanation of what's in the topic sentence. The supporting information in a body paragraph has several essential characteristics. One of those is unity. Unity simply indicates the need for all information in the body paragraph to relate to the subject and the controlling idea of the topic sentence. So in a paragraph in which you're describing how your brother's room is messy, all of the information should be about your brother's room and about the messy aspects of your brother's room. If there are aspects about your brother's room that show that he's a sports fan, that should not be included in a paragraph about messiness. And if he has a messy car, that information should not be included in a paragraph about his messy room. So, to repeat, unity means all the supporting information in the paragraph is related to what's stated in the topic sentence. And any information that's included that doesn't relate to the topic sentence is a violation of unity. Coherence indicates that all the sentences in the body paragraph relate to each other in a logical fashion. In other words, the second sentence in the body paragraph relates logically to the third sentence, and the third sentence relates logically to the fourth sentence, and so on. This logical relationship of sentences and the information contained in the sentences is what we mean when we talk about coherence. And finally, detail. I use the term detail as a catch-all for the quality of the information that's contained in the body paragraph. It's not enough that the information relates to the topic sentence and that the pieces fit together. What's especially important is that the information is specific, that it is detailed. Information or statements that are vague or obscure or ambivalent, meaning that they don't have a single and clear meaning, don't help the reader understand the idea that you're trying to explain in the body paragraph. So, detail means, as it suggests, minding the details of your explanation. Now let's move on to building the body paragraphs of the exemplification essay. The assignment for this essay is to identify 3 virtues essential for living a good life, and then using a comprehensive example, explain how that virtue lends itself to producing good effects in one's life. So, as you can see, I've provided you with the topic sentence for a body paragraph for this assignment. 1 virtue essential for living a good life is courage. Let me say a couple of things about this topic sentence and about topic sentences in general. Students sometimes think that writing should be complicated or difficult or fancy. You'll find that when you start to write for people who need to know what it is you have to say, they really don't care about fancy, and they don't care about complicated, and they certainly don't like difficult. What they want is to understand. And so, in the course of this class, it is essential that you practice simplicity and clarity, learning how to make the different parts of the essay do what they're supposed to do. And at the very heart of the matter, communication. So, a simple statement like 1 virtue essential for living a good life is courage tells the reader everything that he or she needs to know about what's coming in this paragraph. You'll find that depending on the scope or purpose of a given essay, you may have to do more than simply write a topic sentence and then write a bunch of information. In some instances, you're going to have to do a little work before you can get to the supporting part. And for the exemplification essay, specifically for this assignment, you are going to have to do that before you can get to the example. If you are stating that courage is essential for living a good life, before you can show somebody being courageous, you have to explain how courage is essential for living a good life. In other words, how does it work? So after your topic sentence, the next sentence or two needs to explain how courage functions. That will give the reader a better understanding of how to assess the example that you're using to illustrate that point. In other words, without a dynamic, without a function for courage, there's nothing to understand in the example. The idea here is that you're going to use the example to show how courage works in somebody's particular life. But before you can do that, you have to show how courage works in general. So, we need logic. There are many ways to explain in a general fashion how a particular virtue works, but in my experience, I think it's easiest to give students a little bit of logic lesson. What I suggest that you do for your explanation prior to the example is to use what logicians call the modus ponens. As you can see, I have it listed out here. If Q, then P. Q, therefore P. What that means is if whatever P represents happens, then, if whatever Q represents happens, then P will happen. After that, you have the Q, showing that Q did happen, and then you can conclude, therefore, P also happened. Let me help you a little bit further by illustrating this in relation to courage. Actually, before we get to courage, let me give you a common way to flesh out the modus ponens. Here's an example of it in action. If I study, that's the P, then I will pass the test, that's the Q. I studied, that's the P. You're asserting P happened. And then, therefore, I passed the test, that's the Q. So what the modus ponens says is it introduces a relationship in the first line, in the first part, and says if this is the case, then that is the case. Then it shows that the P was the case, and therefore you can conclude that the Q is the case. Now, let's take this to our virtue. Using modus ponens, we'll have essentially two parts for the paragraph following the topic sentence. The first part is the first part of the modus ponens, the if P then Q. The P is going to be the virtue, the Q is going to be the result of the virtue. You can use this in all of your paragraphs, but I'm going to show you how I'm using it in this paragraph about courage. So as you can see very simply, if a person has courage, then she can overcome fear in order to obtain a goal. You should always remember, by the way, in these paragraphs, that the object of the example is to show how the courage allows somebody to gain something. I sometimes call this a benefit, but benefit simply comes from the Latin bene, meaning good. So some good has to come out of the situation you're writing about in the example. And that good has to be produced through the virtue. So before we look at the example, we need to establish what the example is going to show. So that's our first part of modus ponens here. What I'm going to show you in the example is a person who has courage, and that person then overcomes fear, because that's what courage allows you to do, and then something good happens to the person because the person overcame fear. Let's go forward. As you can see, the example will take the form of the second and third parts of modus ponens. The Q is going to be the example, or the first part of the example, showing the person having, in this case, courage. And the Q will be the conclusion of the example, showing the good that happened because in this particular situation, the person had courage. So as you can see, the entire body of the paragraph has a logical structure. If you simply follow the modus ponens, then you should be able to produce a coherent and clear paragraph. Again, just to repeat, the Q in this case is going to be courage, the virtue, in the face of fear, what the virtue allows you to cope with or overcome. And then the P, of course, will be the good end to the situation. Now, in order to flesh out the logic, as I've titled this, every example needs to have a set of components. It's very much like a mini movie or short story or novel. So I'm going to take this approach and identify the parts that your example should have. First, there should be an actor, the person who has the virtue, the person that you're writing about. This person must be somebody that you know, or it could be yourself. But it cannot be a historical figure. It cannot be a hypothetical figure. It cannot be somebody from a work of fiction or literature or a movie. In other words, if you're trying to show that from your experience as a reasonable person, you have seen this virtue in action, and now because of your experience with this virtue, because of this firsthand knowledge that you have, you're now telling the reader, look, you need to have courage. And I'm going to show you why. It's coming out of my experience. So it's not something I'm just making up or speculating about. It's something that is real. It's something that's demonstrable, that's provable. So the actor must be a real person that you know, or yourself. The person must have a goal. This is sort of classic story building. Every main character in a story, whether it's a real story or whether it is a work of fiction, every character has to have a goal, something that the person is trying to achieve or trying to attain. So your actor needs to have a goal as well. You also need to have a situation. There needs to be something that's going on in this person's life that makes the goal necessary to, as you'll see in the example I'm going to show in a moment, the goal that the person I've selected has a larger end, meaning that there is something that by achieving this smaller goal, there is a larger good that that person is going to achieve. So I've used the term state of affairs, just means a situation in which the person finds himself or herself and in which the person is going to need to use the virtue in order to attain in order to achieve the goal. Now, this is very important. There has to be an obstacle. Okay, the virtues that I encourage you to select to write about, I've used the term practical virtues in the assignment. I recommend that you think of these virtues as a quality within the person that allows them to overcome an obstacle. If you can think of overcoming obstacles to attain goals, it's going to make the examples that much easier to identify and to write about. So there needs to be something in the way. If you're trying to attain a goal and you simply attain it without any problem, you don't need a virtue. You don't need any quality. You just get it. However, you need some kind of virtue, some kind of internal quality or fortitude if something stands in the way of your goal. So in this case, it's important that there needs to be an obstacle. And then, like a movie or like a novel or a short story, the conflict that the actor is engaged in comes to a climax in which the person overcomes the obstacle. In this case, what I want you to focus on are the actions, the steps the person takes in order to overcome the obstacle, in order to attain the desired end or goal. It's very important. You can't simply say that faced with a situation, my friend had courage and then she got her goal. No, you can't simply say the friend had courage. You have to show the friend being courageous. This is the part of the example that most students have a difficult time with. So please remember, once you've identified the actor, what the actor's after, what the situation is, what the obstacle is, what steps does the actor take in order to overcome the obstacle? That is the heart and soul of the example, because that is the heart and soul of the virtue. And finally, the outcome. The outcome is the attainment or the achievement of the goal and the resolution of the situation. So, this is a nice way to end your paragraph because it underscores what you said earlier, that if a person has the virtue, then the person can overcome the obstacle in order to attain that goal. Now, let me move on to show you an example that I've put together from my memories of a friend of mine, and I think it'll help illustrate how to illustrate. Going back to our topic sentence and our reasoning, how the virtue works, let's put it all together. One virtue essential for living a good life is courage. So, if a person has courage, then she can overcome fear to obtain a goal. So, the actor that I'm considering here is my friend Stan from childhood, and the situation or the goal that he has in this example is to make an A on a speech and speech class. The situation, though, is that he needs to make an A in order to make a C in the class. So you see, we go from simply the goal to what the situation is. What's the state of affairs? Why does this person need this goal? Okay, it's a serious situation. No A on the speech, and he has to repeat the class. The obstacle, of course, is that he's afraid of making speeches. So all of these things create the situation where there's a need for courage. So how does the courage work in this situation? Well, that's where the climax is. So the courage allowed him to practice his speech in front of his family. Then, that you might imagine it's easier to do that, then he can build up a little bit more courage. He practices in front of his friends. And then, from there, his classmates, people that are not quite as intimate with him, where it requires a greater buildup of courage. But by the time that he gives a speech in front of the class, he has confidence. Okay. And as a result, he made an A on the speech and a C in the class. Because he had courage. He overcame his fear of giving a speech in order to make an A and pass the class. And that's it, y'all. In a nutshell, that's what each one of your paragraphs is doing in this essay. Of course, I know I make it sound easy because that's my job as an instructor and as someone who's taught English for decades. I'm supposed to make it sound easy. It's not going to be as easy as I make it sound, but I've given you all of the tools necessary to make your job as painless as possible. It won't be painless per se, but as painless as possible. So we will meet again in other presentations.